everyone, and welcome to another edition of Political Capital, your best source for all the latest in BC political news. No federal election talk this week. Yay! We are done with the federal election. We don't ever have to speak of it again. Actually, let me check here. No, it may come up slightly near the end. Thank you. Thank you for being here and for subscribing to the podcast, for watching us on TV, on the Check Plus app, which is free. You should check it out. All the past episodes are on there as well. And for sticking with us each and every week. Next week, the legislature is back in session, so we'll have a lot to talk about as the MLAs resume and regather from across the province to deal with this fourth wave of COVID and whatever else is on the agenda. But let's bring in the panel this week because we got lots to talk about, starting with Jillian Oliver, Green strategist extraordinaire. Hello, Jillian. Thanks for being here.
Hey, Rob. Thanks for having me.
And Maclean Kay, editor of The Orca. Hello, Maclean.
Hey, Rob. And speaking of the federal election, no, I'm just kidding.
Oh, no, don't do it. Don't do it. Okay, good. We didn't have to cut your feed there. And Katie is off this week, but she'll be joining us next week as well. Let's start with an issue that we have talked about in the past, but just kind of really picked up a lot of steam this week, and that is the old growth logging protests at Fairy Creek. And there was a court ruling this week that refused to extend the injunction that has caused all the arrests at Fairy Creek. And the justice from the BC Supreme Court basically picked this thing up and hurled it back at Premier John Horgan. It's landed on his desk, and he's got to figure out what to do with the protest, with the civil disobedience, with old growth logging, with everything that's going on that file. Jillian, we've talked a bit about it, but where are we now, do you think, with the rejection of this injunction and the fact that kind of the judge pointed back a little bit at the provincial government?
Yeah, I think I think that's exactly the right way to frame it. It really is back in the governmental lap now. And, it's not great timing for them being back in session. There's always a lot more heat on the government when the opposition is in the House and asking them questions every day, and the press is there too. Yeah, and I think that it's clear that the protesters are not letting up. They saw this as a clear victory. The judge had a fairly damning indictment of the police tactics that have been used. He said that they were substantially infringing on civil liberties. So yeah, I think that it puts a lot of pressure on the government to deliver more deferrals, more action that they promised. They said that there was going to be more deferrals coming this summer. It's no longer summer. That didn't happen. So I think that, time has long been out for them to take some action on it. And we're going to have to see some movement here. Otherwise, things are going to increasingly come to a head, I think.
Just sticking with you, Jillian, do you think there's any deferral plan that government can come up with? And we heard the Premier say there's one coming in a few weeks from now that will satisfy the protesters at Fairy Creek? Because I think I'm sort of still wrapping my head around whether or not let's say the Horgan government does come up with a great deferral plan and the traditional kind of environmental organizations support it. Do they influence what's happening at Fairy Creek, or do you see a scenario where the government takes enough action that the Fairy Creek protest just naturally disappears? Is that even possible, do you think?
I think so. I think to get, all parties, including the Pacheedaht First Nation, to agreement, there's going to have to be financial resources put on the table, probably to satisfy everybody. I think, the problem that the government, or it's not a problem, the situation that the government is in right now is that there's just so little of these old growth trees left. And so there's really no more middle ground. It's sort of like you're going to protect them or you're not. And the old growth report that they said that they would adopt was really clear about that. They've engaged experts who have already mapped out where these areas are. The only thing left to do is actually just to do it. So yes, they could do it. The federal government has also put resources on the table. The Liberals promised that in the federal election, and they're in government now. So yeah, I think it's possible, but it's obviously going to be hard to get there.
Yeah, the government, you mentioned that technical report, the sort of second technical report government has on old growth. The forest minister at one point in the last week saying she has it. She has this new report that defines old growth. Got it in August. She's working now on adding the socioeconomic lens to it, which I assume is government's financial package to help compensate companies or whatever else, job losses and that type of thing. So government, it's not just about the technical side of it. It's clear government's going to fiddle and poke and prod and stretch and move that around until it fits into whatever forest mandate they have. Maclean, do you have any sense of what all of this kind of means now that it's back on the Premier's desk?
Well, you and Jillian are right in that the judge was pretty explicit in that this is his problem now. And if you read his ruling fairly carefully, he drops some hints, Justice Thompson, that he thinks criminal charges are probably just around the corner for some, not all, of the protesters. He was very clear in his condemnation of police tactics as well. But I think some of the hints he dropped that there might be charges in the future were kind of ignored in some of they were celebrations, really. The other thing that's you can't unpack from this is yesterday was Truth and Reconciliation Day, and the Pachidat asked the protesters to leave, I believe, for the sixth time yesterday, and that was again sort of studiously ignored. And you can't separate that from resource development in general in this province, but also specifically with this case where this is on their traditional territory. They have been very clear that they do not welcome outside interference and certainly don't welcome disruptive protests. And yet no one's going anywhere. So there's a lot going on here all at once, and it's difficult to separate any one aspect of it.
Yeah, the Pachidat Nation and other nations have called for the protesters to leave, but there's I think a split within, as there should be. We kind of view sometimes First Nations as having one opinion of things, and obviously there are different opinions in the community about this. I kind of wonder, and I talked to the Forest Minister this week. She said there's a bill coming in the session of the legislature that will give the government additional powers to hand over forest tenures to First Nations, to remove them from logging companies and give them with compensation in an easier way. And I kind of wonder if maybe that's the solution for this particular forest tenure around Fairy Creek. Take it from Teal Jones, compensate the company, give it to the Pachidat, the other nations. They contract back with Teal Jones or whatever forest company they want to do the logging that they want in a sustainable way, in a partnership that benefits everyone, and maybe that is the path forward. I think that's what the Horgan government would like to do. I think that's where they consider the future of the forest industry, but I don't know if we get there anytime soon. And in the meantime, the protests continue. Let's move on to another issue where there are protests of a certain type, and that is kind of an uprising of parent anger over BC's back-to-school plan, a feeling like the safety procedures, the public health orders put in place were not strong enough, and so we've seen parent advisory groups and school districts moving beyond Dr. Bonnie Henry's provincial health kind of safety orders in schools, leading to her actually having to flip-flop and put in a wider mask mandate than she originally had planned. Maclean, what do we make of this kind of larger movement, this sort of revolt or defiance of the BC government's plan because parents are looking at case counts increasing amongst kids and saying, we're not happy with this?
Well, I am one of those parents. I have a child in grade 1 who this new expanded mask mandate will directly affect, and so I sympathize. The problem I have with this is not necessarily the step that's being taken, but it sort of undermines confidence because it looks as though Dr. Bonnie Henry, and we're taping as she's announcing, so we're blind to what she's saying right now, but it looks as though that the province is sort of crumbling to pressure from the parents and groups and teachers and groups like that. And it's not necessarily that the science is clear that kids from K to 4 would benefit from masking all day long. It's if so, we haven't seen that, and we have in fact been told the opposite for months and months and months. So it's hard to suggest it's anything but. It's not a coincidence that they're caving now when pressure mounts. And I just went ahead and used the word caved. That's what this looks like. And maybe it's a good thing, but at the same time, if public pressure is dictating public health policy, it's hard to feel confident about, making good decisions going forward.
We sat through a very lengthy briefing from Dr. Henry earlier this week showing that in her argument, it's not schools that are causing the spread of COVID among school-age children. In some cases, that spread began in the north and the interior before schools resumed. She says it's directly linked to the vaccination of adults around them and the vaccination rates of the communities they're in. That's what's causing the wave that we have as part of the wave that we're in. But Jillian, nonetheless, there's kind of, and not just in this, but in other areas, there's a sense of disbelief or overwhelming worry or anxiety at some of the decisions government's made, and kind of that public pushback that sometimes leads to Dr. Henry making changes like this. How do we begin to kind of understand that, do you think?
I think it kind of goes back to one really big misstep, which was that press conference in the summer where they basically declared that COVID was over.
Right.
And it's been really, really hard to sort of put the cat back in the bag after that. They took away masks for like, what was it, 5 weeks, and then had to put them back in. And I think, that sent a really clear message to people that, that we didn't have to worry anymore. But then we start to see cases tracking up. You see all these reports in the news about hospitals and families and all these sorts of things. And it causes a lot of anxiety and loss of trust because people are seeing conflicting information. And it kind of results in a little bit more chaos. I think it's really hard. I don't know where the government goes from here to try to rebuild that trust because it's not the first time that they've had to backtrack. There's been other things. I think they were slow to acknowledge aerosol transmission. They've also said, that kids don't get sick, these sorts of things, but it's been different with the Delta variant. They've been really slow to acknowledge that. And I think it's not surprising that we're seeing this kind of blowback as school gets back in session.
It's funny because I think we expect government to change when the science changes and when people want change. That's responsiveness that we expect from a government. And yet sometimes it happens and we're watching it and going, as Maclean pointed out, it feels like we've undermined ourselves. We've pushed, we've pushed Dr. Henry to change something that she's been telling us for months we didn't need to change. Have we accomplished anything in doing that? And I guess, Jillian, to go back to you, is there, from a government's point of view, you want to be responsive, you want to follow what people want, but at the same time, when you do it, you chip away at yourself. And how do you find that balance, do you think?
Well, I think, like I said, I think that they probably should have taken a slower approach to the reopening just in the interest of caution. I think it was the same thing, right? They saw that the public really wanted to go back to normal, but things were not normal. That just wasn't the reality. I think that this is a case where they needed to go slower and more gradual rather than, really just like focusing on getting back to that ribbon cutting on the reopening of society, which just obviously wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
It's not tax policy. This is not the HST where, the public says, well, we don't want this. And so, okay, well, then we won't do it because it's taxes. This is public health measures. If we were going to bow, if the provincial government was going to bow to public pressure on measures, then they would rescind the mask mandate in Dawson Creek because apparently a significant chunk of the population there doesn't want it. Of course, they're not going to do that, even though it's unpopular. So to seed ground here because of popular opinion and sort of a revolt among parents and teachers and all that kind of thing, I really think it does undermine confidence, even if it is the right decision.
And yet we expect Dr. Henry to, we react poorly when Dr. Henry doesn't listen, as a society too. We kind of pick on her and say, why aren't you responding to concerns? Why aren't you releasing this data? Why aren't you and then when she does, it doesn't serve her purpose or the larger purpose of confidence. It only makes us feel good that we got a win, or parents will feel happy that they forced Dr. Henry to take seriously their concerns that the data doesn't back up. And they'll be happy about that. It's kind of, and in masks have been a tough one because I think over the, 19 months we've been in this, we've sort of started to believe that masks, again, protect us from getting the virus, as if our little cotton things, they protect us from shedding the virus out when we're contagious. And if everyone wears them, then that's great. But you don't just put one on and suddenly you're immune to COVID. And yet that's how it feels, right? And so this parent kind of worry and anxiety over their kids is, am I doing the right thing, sending them to school? One mask is better than nothing, runs up against the science over here of Dr. Henry and 27 charts that show, maybe we don't need to do that. So I find it a fascinating, even beyond just the decision, a fascinating tension this far into COVID that we're still doing this, and that at this point, Dr. Henry's losing. And I don't know what that means. Hopefully we wrap this pandemic up soon, because I think the wheels are coming off the bus a little bit. Let's move on with our last segment here on the BC Liberal leadership race. There was the first public televised, I guess it wasn't televised, internet-avised leaders debate this past week. Let's just grab your thoughts, Maclean, on how you think it went. Were there any winners and losers in this?
I don't think there were any winners and losers. We're trained to look for knockout blows in that in debates, and that just didn't happen, and it usually doesn't in any debate. I was surprised. I thought that the debate would be a little more kid glovey, and we're all friends here and nicey nicey, and it wasn't. It was a little more aggressive than that. There were some elbows up and some shots fired. I think the one takeaway that you can take from the debate is that whether or not those of us watching from the sidelines think Kevin Falcon is the favorite, the other candidates clearly view him as the favorite because he received, what would you say, 90% of the shots fired. There was one or two at some of the others, but I mean, he got most of the attention. And so, I mean, I'm not privy to things like membership sales or event attendance or anything like that, but it does seem pretty clear that the other camps view Falcon as a pretty clear frontrunner at the moment.
Yeah, for sure. Jillian, you've prepared leaders for candidates debates and also the provincial elections debates. What jumped out at you when you were watching this?
Yeah, I agree. I think that the other candidates definitely showed their hand that they think Falcon's the one to beat. I thought it was interesting. The biggest attack that we saw at him was that he might not run if he doesn't win leadership, which I thought was silly. I thought that the attacks talking about how he has the most baggage and that would be damaging for the party were a lot more compelling. I thought that, it was interesting to see a couple things. One, the difference in tone of the debate overall. I thought that the last leadership debate, which I think was in 2018, right, was a little bit more acrimonious. You could tell that the parties involved are really aware that they want to move past the damage done to the party in the past. Yeah, I thought that Michael Lee, Val Litwin, and Ellis Ross came across as very authentic. That they focused a lot more on striking a different tone than past BC Liberal leaders, especially compared to Wilkinson. They were really going out of their way to speak from a place of sort of compassion and values. And we saw all the candidates really focus on their personal experience and record and sort of biographies, which is a really good strategy in the first debate. Introduce yourself to the membership, show what you bring to the table before, I assume, moving on to some of the meatier stuff that we'll see in later debates.
It's an interesting one because, for non sort of political listeners, this is not a debate in which you're trying to appeal to the public. You're not trying to appeal to you, the listener. They're trying to appeal to the members of the party. And sometimes you get that disconnect between members of the party wanting one thing and the electorate one day wanting something else. And so it's different people you're talking to. And you saw that with the federal conservative leader saying one thing to get the leadership of the party and another thing to get votes in the election. Maclean, there were a lot of lines that seemed rehearsed here. There was a reference to we should be, look for someone who's the Netflix of leadership candidates, not a bargain bin blockbuster candidate. Val Litwin spent the entire debate on a metaphor that the leadership is like downloading an operating system update, and you shouldn't click remind me later. You should download the latest OS, 14.8.2.7, which lost me. But clearly they went in with ideas of what they wanted to say, and then their social media platforms executed them instantly. Do you think that registered with the Liberal membership who they're trying to appeal to?
I think they're trying to appeal to the BC Liberal membership, but I actually would take issue with the fact that that's the only audience. The way that anyone is going to win this this leadership campaign is actually by signing up new members. And so I think there is an explicit appeal to people who aren't members, and the various camps are trying to sign them up. But yeah, I mean, you're right. I think of all the lines, Gavin Dew seemed to be the one that had the most of it. You mentioned the Netflix, the blockbuster one. He came prepared with Kevin Falcon's quotes against him, and I think it was Michael Lee who said that we can't be bragging about bridges built in the past. We have to focus on the future, which was actually another sort of veiled shot at Falcon. Yeah, they were ready. I think that it was the other five candidates trying to sort of distinguish themselves from Falcon in that respect. Sort of each one of them individually saying, I'm the person in Renee Merrifield's case to bring the party forward, and that guy is a voice from the past. Is, I think, the message they were trying to send.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I think it's the unofficial launch of the leadership race. Now everyone's paying attention, so we'll see where it goes from here. Let's just quickly do our hot take. Well, we've got 2 minutes left here. It was the first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation earlier this week on Thursday. There was, unfortunately for the Prime Minister, a camera crew in Tofino where he decided to take his holiday instead of attending any Truth and Reconciliation events in person on the actual day. And the camera crew chased him down a beach in Tofino until the RCMP stopped them, and it looked horrendous. I guess the question is, given that he attended a previous Truth and Reconciliation event the night before, the hot take this week is, should Justin Trudeau have gone on holiday on Truth and Reconciliation Day? And you feel free to justify your yes or no, Maclean.
I mean, no. For the simple reason that we're talking about it, and it became an issue. This is a holiday that he declared. This was the first ever one. He was invited to go to. The reason we're doing this is because of the discovery of the unmarked graves outside Kamloops at the Kamloops Residential School site. He was invited to go there. He hasn't been there yet. It's kind of inexcusable, actually. I'm kind of baffled that he and his team thought this would pass muster. And just the fact that we're talking about what the Prime Minister did surfing on the first ever Truth and Reconciliation Day is a pretty clear no. He should not have done that.
Plus the mistruths from his office, that he was in Ottawa when his plane was in Tofino, that he was, quote, not on the beach when the camera chased him down the beach. Anyways, Jillian, yes, or do you think he should have done this or not?
I think he could have probably made it to Kamloops in the morning and been in Tofino by the afternoon. I don't begrudge politicians taking holidays, especially after elections, although it was his choice to call that election. It's bad optics. I think it's another indication that he's probably not going to run again, though.
Yeah, that is how we kind of are going to view all his gaffes from now on as, well, Trudeau doesn't care. He's not running again.
It's a shame they only allow surfing on Thursdays. They closed the ocean on Friday, so he really had no choice.
And I was joking on Twitter, he spent more time vacationing on the island than he did campaigning here in the election, because he barely paid any attention to it at all. But anyways, that's great. Thank you for being here this week, Maclean and Jillian. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next week on Political Capital.